Every once in a while, a lens comes along that just suits your needs perfectly. And while I came to the Mamiya 645 system for that beautiful 80mm 1.9 lens, I stayed for the Mamiya 45mm 2.8. Let's take a look at it. Welcome back to Overexposed, your place for spicy camera reviews and bad picks. I bought my Mamiya M645 and started looking at some lenses. I knew that I wanted something around the 50mm focal length, and the 80 1.9 more than satisfies that. But I also wanted something a little wider, and immediately I set my eyes on the 45 2.8. Although this lens was just a little bit harder to come by than the standard 80mm 2.8 kit lens that comes along with most Mamiya 645s, I really wanted that wider focal length, being as I like to shoot landscapes and environmental portraits sometimes. So the wider focal length would really come in handy. So let's talk a little bit about the history of the Mamiya 45 2.8. Obviously the lens is for the Mamiya M645 system, and this lens has been made since the 70s and 80s. It was available in a few different versions, but the version that I'm using on my camera is the C version, the Mamiya Sekor C, which I believe stands for coating. The C version is also the older version, as opposed to the N version, which is understandably the newer version. After doing a whopping 20 minutes of research on Google trying to find out more about the lens, there wasn't really that much out there. I did find this statement from Mamiya: "Superb optical quality and a newly perfected compact design make this a smooth and convenient wide-angle lens for general use photography. Mamiya Sekor's improved floating lens system automatically adjusts the lens for maximum corner and edge sharpness, even at the minimum focus distance." So that's a lot of market puffery, but what it amounts to is it's a pretty nice lens. So let's talk about some of the specs of this lens. It's pretty small and compact, you can see. Pretty nifty form factor here. It weighs 470 grams, and that's partly due to the all-metal construction. The lens is made entirely out of metal and glass, so the build quality is rather high. The lens has a 6-blade aperture in the diaphragm and a minimum aperture of f/22. The optical design that Mamiya was talking about has 9 elements in 7 groups, and if you want to know what that means, me too. As Mamiya bragged in their marketing materials, the fact that this lens does have floating elements does mean that the lens can adapt closer focusing distances and still maintain that really high sharpness. That's really important for image quality and was a pretty inventive thing for a lens from the 70s and 80s. The lens close focuses to about 18 centimeters. This is a 45mm focal length, but in 645 land, that's actually a 35mm equivalent of 28mm, so moderately wide. Let's talk a little bit about the use and operation of this lens. As I said, this is my most used lens. It hardly comes off the camera. It's a very usable focal length, and when I'm out shooting landscapes or night photography, the 28mm focal length is almost perfect. This is my most used lens, and I think that's because it's actually really simple to use. The lens is so simple you could teach your cat. Focusing is controlled with a big grippy focus ring, and then the aperture is controlled with a clicky aperture. The focusing is nice and buttery smooth, although as I think I've pointed out before, I don't think I've met a focus ring that isn't really smooth. I think that there would be something wrong with it. I don't see a way to declick the aperture, although that's not a problem for me. If you do intend to adapt this to a modern digital camera and try to use it for video, that may be problematic, so that's something to bear in mind. So something we touched on earlier is the build quality of the lens. Like I pointed out, everything feels nice and well put together. Everything on the lens is metal. The markings on the lens are engraved and filled with paint, and the lens elements are glass. My version performs flawlessly, is in perfect condition. This lens is probably 30 or 40 years old. This lens is at least 40 years old at this point, and it looks like it will be good for at least another 40 more, if not 2 or 3 times that. So build quality is extremely nice, and looks like the lens is gonna hold up really well over the long term. I mean, it already has. Now the part of the review that you guys have been waiting on, image quality. As I've shot quite a few rolls of film through my Mamiya M645 and used this lens for a lot of those shots, I've got a pretty nice selection of images to draw on. When I say the image quality is perfect, I mean it really is almost perfect. Take a look at what you can expect. The lens leaves hardly anything to complain about. It's nice and sharp. The images provide plenty of contrast. The lens renders just beautifully. If you position your subject close enough to the lens, you're gonna get really nice bokeh. I use the lens primarily for landscapes, nightscapes, environmental portraiture, and apart from it being a slow lens to use, being all manual everything, the lens leaves nothing to complain about on the image quality front. Something else we should probably talk about is the price. The lens is 200 bucks, which in my mind isn't so bad. Considering everything the lens is capable of doing, the image quality that it provides, the build quality, and the fact that it's gonna be around for a really long time, I think this lens is a pretty good value. If you wanna be in the Mamiya M645 system, this is a lens you probably have to add to your bag. It's gonna pair really nicely with any of the 80mm options from Mamiya and give you a nice wide angle option to switch out to. And honestly, those two lenses alone would provide a pretty good working system for many film photographers. A few of the drawbacks of the lens though, obviously these things can't be bought new anymore, so any version of the lens that you're gonna have to snag it off eBay and buy it secondhand. A few criticisms of the lens. I don't really have that much to criticize the lens about, other than it is a little heavy at 470 grams. The lens has some heft to it to be so small and diminutive. The lens is also very slow to use. I think that's the deal with the devil that we all made when we bought medium format cameras though, was that we were gonna resign ourselves to slow and deliberate shooting. That's a problem with the lens. It is gonna be slow and the lens is gonna make you slow down your shooting style quite a bit. But again, if you're shooting medium format like I am, I don't think you really care all that much. So maybe that's not such a big deal. Something else to point out though about the lens, when you are trying to focus the lens, especially at nighttime, the fact that the lens only opens up to 2.8 can make it really hard to get enough light in to actually see the picture through the viewfinder. That's something to be aware of, and let's be honest, there isn't a wider option, so 2.8 is as good as you're gonna get. You can't go to the 1.4 option. This is medium format territory. But it can be rather difficult to focus at nighttime. To try to get your focusing as close as you think you can, and then stop down a little bit to ensure that maybe you'll be able to cover up any focusing mistakes with depth of field. All right, to wrap things up for this lens, one of my favorite lenses that I own. It's a really, really good lens. I haven't sold it yet. I bought it probably a year ago. It's been with me all over the country. One of my favorite lenses that I own. Highly recommend, if you're in the Mamiya 645 system, a version of the 45 2.8 sekor C lens is well worth spending some money on and adding to your collection. If you find these videos that I'm doing helpful, please subscribe to my channel, give the video a thumbs up. That helps the video go to more people. But as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.